Hey students, Mr. Passeri here, and it is late on a Friday night. And before I turn in for the night, I thought it would be fun to go over what we have done for the week, expand upon some of the topics, and to give some specifics. This week we talked about the Bill of Rights, and we talked also about the issue of checks and balances. So without further ado, let's get down to talking about the specific Bill of rights, and then we'll touch briefly on why we have checks and balances. So, number one for your Bill of Rights is your freedom of religion, speech, press, assembly, and petition. So this basically gives you freedom of conscience and freedom outside of your mind and your heart. Okay, so your freedom of religion means that you can worship freely however you want. The state, the government, has no power to tell you what you can believe in terms of your faith. It can't force you to have a faith. So that's your freedom of religion. Go to whatever church you want, believe whatever you want. Your freedom of speech is you have the freedom to say whatever you want. You don't have the right to threaten violence against people. But you do have the right to speak your mind openly when it comes to pretty much anything within the framework of public safety. You have the freedom of the press. The press is not controlled by the government. The press can check the government's power and report whatever it wants. Freedom of assembly, you can gather however you want, and freedom of petition, you have the right to present a list of written demands to your leaders. Those are your First Amendment rights. So this basically is saying, look, this is what we're doing to ensure that people's personal freedoms are not going to be trampled by the new constitutional order. Because a lot of people, notably the anti-federalists from your reading, as you know, were concerned that the Constitution was going to take away people's rights that had been hard fought and won in the Revolutionary War. The Second Amendment is your right to bear arms, to maintain a well-regulated militia. The First and Second Amendment have been in the news recently, a lot actually. Because the press has been fighting a lot with the president because they don't like each other. And I'm not going to say who's right and who's wrong, because they're both wrong in different ways and both right in different ways, in my personal opinion. But there's definitely been a contentious relationship between the press and the president recently, and that shows you the freedom of the press. The freedom of assembly, this is also interesting because while we're in quarantine, we're supposed to be social distancing, but does that take away your right to exercise your First Amendment ability to assemble and protest if you don't agree with what your political leaders are doing? So that's interesting. And then your other thing is that some of these protesters, and I would argue foolishly, are carrying guns, which is now turning into kind of a weird area where it's like, are you threatening government leaders with these guns? Like, what are you doing with these things here? Because the whole point of the Second Amendment, there's a couple points. In the specific context of the time that it was written, the Second Amendment was practical because the United States had a young army. It was a young country. There were Native Americans who could attack settlers. It was reasonable that the British could attack again. So to have a well-armed citizen army, which is what a militia is, made sense. The other function of the Second Amendment, if you take a look at the principles of checks and balances, this is a way for the citizens to check the power of the government, right? So if somebody kicks down your door and says, give me all your stuff, if you have a gun, you can have a lot better chance at checking that person's power than if you don't have a gun, right? So that's the Second Amendment right there. It's got good potential and bad potential, but it is your second thing to ensure that you are not going to be abused by the new leaders of the country. Take when the Constitution was written, and also that the new country has the ability to protect itself from within and from without. The Third Amendment has to do no quartering of soldiers. This means you can't throw quarters at soldiers. That's not true at all. What it is that soldiers cannot come into your house and say, "Hey, I'm sleeping on your couch and eating your food, and there's nothing you can do about it." This kind of thing happened under British occupation during, in Boston in the lead up to the Revolutionary War. This is to ensure that soldiers are not going to push people around. You have the right to your property. You have the right to your privacy. The Fourth Amendment, the freedom of unreasonable searches and seizures. You need to have a warrant if you're a policeman and you want to go and search someone's car or home. Now, a warrant is written permission from the state, okay? But if a police officer has probable cause, like he sees you doing something clearly illegal, he has the right to go into your space and gather evidence. For example, say you are driving down the road at 80 miles an hour and you have a gun, drugs, and hostage in your car, and a policeman pulls you over and he sees the drugs, gun, and hostage. He doesn't need a warrant, okay? Like, he's just like, okay, I'm untying you and I'm taking that stuff and you're getting in my car in handcuffs, that's fine. But he can't just say, I don't know, that baseball hat you're wearing might be associated with a gang, so I'm going to search your car. Like, you can't do that. You got to have a warrant for that. Okay, so Fifth Amendment is freedom from self-incrimination and double jeopardy. Basically, if you're put on trial, you don't have to testify against yourself. You can take the stand if you're called to the stand and say, hey, I don't have to answer that question. I'm exercising my Fifth Amendment. That's, the jury might think you're guilty. So, it's like, what do you have to hide, if you're not answering this question? But you don't have to answer any questions if you don't want to. That's your Fifth Amendment. Double jeopardy, you can't get convicted of the same crime twice. So if you go and kill someone, which you should not do, and you're proven innocent from doing that, you got away with murder. You could literally confess to that murder and not be convicted of that murder. You might be held financially responsible for that murder, and if you got a jaywalking ticket, they might try to throw you in jail for 30 years, but you can't be convicted of that murder. No conviction of the same crime twice. Okay, number 6, the rights of accused persons, e.g., the right to a speedy and public trial. Okay, so what the Sixth Amendment is saying is that you have the right to a trial that is not held in secret. It's not just you in front of a bunch of politicians in a room, like in a dark room or something like that. No, everything should be out in the open. And this should not take an unreasonably long amount of time. This should be moving as quickly as possible, so you're not just rotting in jail waiting for some kind of resolution of what you're charged with. Okay? The Seventh Amendment, you have the right to a jury, not just in a criminal case, but also in civil cases. Now, civil cases is what you get with one of Mr. Passeri's favorite things to watch, daytime judge shows. So Judge Judy, Judge Mathis, Judge Christina Perez, Judge Maybelline, Judge Joe Brown, all these daytime, Judge Marilyn Milian, all of them. They all are civil cases. What does that mean? You wronged me and you owe me money, right? Like, that's a civil case. And you get a right to a jury trial in a civil case as well as a criminal case. Okay? The Eighth Amendment, freedom from excessive bail and cruel and unusual punishment. So, the government cannot say, hey, you are under arrest for stealing a video game, which you shouldn't do. And I'm going to say that it will take $1 million for your family to get you out of jail before you're put on trial. That can't happen. Okay. Bail is set according to the severity of your crime and your character. Okay. No cruel and unusual punishment either, right? If you steal a video game, the government does not have the right to chop off your hand, so you don't steal anymore. The Ninth Amendment. So what the Ninth Amendment says in a fancy way is that the rights given to you in the Constitution and the Bill of Rights are not your only rights. You have more rights than these. Your rights are not limited to what's outlined here. Okay? So let's just be clear about that. And the 10th Amendment basically says if anything is left blank or uncertain in the Constitution and in the Bill of Rights, it is the state's call to make their own laws and rules. And that's your Bill of Rights right there. Now, checks and balances. Again, we talked about that last week. Again, the whole point of checks and balances is just to ensure that one person or group does not start dominating the country. So basically what you have is you have different centers of power with different responsibilities that counter the other powers and responsibilities of, you know, the new political leaders. So, for example, Congress makes the laws. The president has to approve the laws and enforce the laws. The president appoints Supreme Court justices, but the president can get put on trial by the legislature, and that can, he's at the mercy of the rule of law, which is ultimately enforced by the Supreme Court. This is what we have as a new political order to ensure that the young United States doesn't either descend into chaos or a monarchy with absolute power. And that's good for the citizens, but the founders thought it was also good for them as a ruling class, too, because they wouldn't get, even if we're just looking at this in terms of, a bunch of rich old white men making rules that benefit themselves, even within their own circle, they don't want another faction of their class dominating them, right? They want balance and harmony and enlightened ideas all put to service of their own power, right? So there you have it, guys. So that's your little YouTube video on the Bill of Rights and checks and balances. Again, the Bill of Rights are designed to ensure that the Constitution doesn't become tyrannical. It's to guarantee people their personal freedoms and legal protections. Hopefully you're staying protected from any germs. Hopefully you're enjoying homeschooling and distance learning. And I will see you in Google Classroom and on YouTube in the very near future. You take care, drink lots of vitamin C, wear a mask when you go outside, and I will see you around on the internet. Bye-bye.